All right, we are on Daf Kof Nun He 155. We're starting a bit on the previous page. Today we're going to talk about preparing food for animals and force feeding animals. So these have some relevance to those who have pets or want to go feed the ducks and things like that. So, but we start with just finishing off one piece from yesterday's daf. Which was about using the sides of a tree. We know that one is not allowed to climb a tree or rest anything on top of a tree and use it. Can't use a tree because you may, if climbing it is considered work, is not shevut. You may come to pick something from it, according to the Bavli. The question was, what about leaning something on the side or putting a peg into the side of the tree and then climbing on top of that or leaning on that. That was machloket between Rabbah, who said it's permitted, and Abaye, who said the sides of the tree are prohibited. Okay, that's what we talked about. Now we're going to say that this machloket between these two Amoraim is parallel to a machloket between two Tanaim. Also about using the sides of a tree. So lema ketana'e en olin la biyom tov. Olin, the word olin, I mistranslated yesterday as to go up, which it does mean in biblical Hebrew, but in rabbinic Hebrew, and in this context, it means to enter. It means to enter into a sukkah. You have a sukkah that's resting on trees. You can't even enter it because the schach is resting on trees, and therefore you're using the trees, and so it's the sukkah is not kosher, or it's kosher. You could use it during the week, but it can't use it on Yom Tov. So that's the word olin. So en olin ba la biyom tov. If you have a sukkah where the sides are made out of trees and the schach is resting on the trees, you cannot go and one may not enter it on Yom Tov. Right, and the second opinion here, Bishimon says you can enter it on Yom Tov and you can use it. And so this is using the sides of a tree. Right, so what's the case? Is this not talking about a case where it's resting, it's using the sides of the tree, it's resting on it, and one says it's permitted and one says it's prohibited? This is the same machloket. Amar Abaye is the one that prohibited this. So he says, La tekula amastadin asuri, and everybody in fact agrees that is not allowed. This case is talking about the sides of sides. In other words, I have a tree, I have a pole sticking out of the tree, and I have a wall resting on the pole, resting on the side of the tree. So since there are two steps, that's what they're talking about. One says you can't enter it, says that is not allowed. One says you can't enter it, says it is allowed. Obviously, this baraita doesn't say anything exactly what the case is, but they're saying it could be. Rava Amar, Manda asar bistadin, asar name besidestadin. Manda share besidestadin, share name besidestadin. He says, no, whatever you say about using something that's coming out, using the side of a tree would be the same as something coming out of the side of the tree, or something resting on something coming out of the side of the tree. If you say it's allowed, all the steps are allowed. If you say it's not allowed, all the steps are not allowed. So in fact, they are talking about that. Hold on, we have another statement. So this is a question to Rabbah, who says it's allowed. We have another case where if I'm making an eruv techumin, that means I want to go 4,000 amot outside my city. So what I can do is I could go take a meal and put it within 2,000 amot, and I say that's designated as my spot where I'm starting Shabbat, and then I can go 2,000 amot around that spot, so I can go further. But the law is that eruv techumin has to be a meal that's edible and has to be accessible. If I put it in a place where I can't get to it or not allowed to get to it, then it's no good. It's not a meal that I can use. So if I take a stake and put it into the side of a tree, and I hang my food on that. I mean, I probably want to do that so animals don't eat it in the meantime. If it's above 10 tefachim, right, then I can't get to it because that is a separate reshut. It's high up, it's like big enough, becomes a reshut hayachid. And since there's no eruv, I can't carry out there, it's in the middle outside the city, so therefore it will be carrying, and so it's not accessible. So that's no good. If I put it below 10 tefachim, right? So below 10 tefachim is like the reshut below it. So that's part of the reshut harabim that it's in, and then that's permitted. So the reason why it's okay, right, is because it's in a pole. Right, that was the only right. It's in a pole next, coming out of it. But if it was not hanging on a stake, even below tefachim, it would not be good. And so what you see here is that, right, this whole question is asked by Rabbah, that's showing that it's not allowed. So in this case, by putting the basket there on the side of the tree, he would be making use of the side of the tree. And so so you can't put it right on the side of the tree, but in this case, I'm putting it on the pole that's coming out of the side of the tree. So you see that he permits using the side of a tree. And so you see that the side of a tree can be allowed even when the side of the tree is not allowed. And so that goes against Rabbah's statement that says the side of the tree is the same as the side as something coming out of the side of the tree. And this over here seems to say that particularly in the case where it's a pole coming out of the side of the tree, that's allowed. I'm allowed to take it from there. But if it was actually hanging on the tree itself, it would not be allowed. No, he's assuming, he's limiting the case to a very small, a thin basket that although it's on the pole, it's so thin that you have to end up pushing against the tree and moving the tree in order to get what's inside. And you're actually using the tree. And so the reason why, so according to this opinion, I'm actually allowed to use the side of the tree. So this backs up the opinion before Rabbah that says it's allowed. And halacha says that you cannot put weight on the side of a tree, but if it's a pole coming out the side of the tree, then that is okay. All right, this is interesting because we know that the 6 cases, Yahal Kegam, where we say halacha is like Abaye, and yet this one is not included in it. But all right, that's a separate matter. Amar Rav Asher, Ashtad Amar Stadin Asurin, Hay Darga de Madla, Ladinache Inesh Adikla. Okay, now that we know that you're not allowed to use the sides of a tree, if you have a ladder and you're going to climb up the ladder, do not lean the ladder against the palm tree itself. Because if I'm leaning against the palm tree itself, then I am using the side of the tree, and that is prohibited. Okay, Davu Stadin. Ela linache agavaze lebar medikla v'chisalek la linach kar'e agavaze ela lintas akanin. Rather, I should lean it on something coming out of the tree, and when I go up, I should make sure to go on the rungs of the ladder and not step on any part of the tree itself. Okay, so now we get to the next Mishnah.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Which of the melachot would this be considered? Like, do we have any idea?
Good question. So using a tree is not one of the 39 melachot, but rather it's a secondary category called shivut. It's not restful to be climbing trees on Shabbat. This is also like swimming and clapping, things like that. Things that are not restful activities. So you're not creating something, you're not manufacturing, so you're not burning anything. not one of the big 39. It wouldn't be would not be punished with any chatat offering or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's just a matter of not being restful.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I mean, this could be, people have tree houses and things like that. You wouldn't be allowed to go into your tree house on Shabbat or Yom Tov. All right. Matirin piki'ai amir. All right, now we're feeding animals, and you have some grain that's tied up, and I want to untie it so that the animals will be able to eat it. That's okay. You can untie piki'ai, a bundle, piki'ai amir, these bundles of grain, so that it can eat. And these kipin, the Gemara is going to discuss what exactly these mean, the different kinds of grain. So you can spread out the kipin so that it can, it's difficult for the animal to get it when it's all bundled up. But you cannot do it with zirin. We'll see. You cannot crush hay or carobs. The carobs that we got as kids on Tu B'Shvat. When we got them, we knew that they were meant for animal food. Certainly when they're dried out like that. So they're difficult to eat, but if they need to be crushed even for an animal. But you're not allowed to do that. You can't crush these two things. Ben daka ben gasa, whether it's a small or big animal. The difference is that a big animal has bigger teeth, can handle bigger things. A small animal not. But either way, it's not allowed according to Tanakama. However, Rabbi Yehuda says, these carobs are really hard and very difficult to eat, and especially for a small animal that has small teeth, so it'd be impossible for it to eat it. So he says, in that particular case, carobs for a small animal, you're allowed to crush it up in order to help it to eat. Okay, those are the opinions in the Talmud. And now the Gemara is going to discuss a fundamental machloket about what is the reason for the things that are prohibited. We'll see two opinions. One is that one is not allowed to make food. You can take food that the animal could already eat and make it easier to eat because you're not changing much, but you can take something that was not food and make it into food. That's the first opinion of Rav Huna. The second opinion of Rav Yehuda is going to say the opposite, that if you can't enhance food because that's just doing work that's really not necessary. But if it would not be edible to the animal at all, then it's more necessary, so you can turn it into food. Okay, so kind of interesting opposite machloket, but let's see how they apply it. Ma Rav Huna hen piki'ain hen kipin. This is piki'ain and kipin. These first two items are the same. Piki'ain today, kipin tilata. It's the same type of grain. The only difference is how it's bundled. One is bundled with 2 ties, and one is bundled with 3 ties. So 3 ties, it takes a little bit more work to open up, but otherwise it's the same thing, and the same law. Zirin de arzeh. Zirin, however, are pieces of cedar branches. Cedar branches most often you'd use for wood, kindling, but sometimes you might use it for to feed an animal. Okay. This is what the Mishnah is saying. Matirin piki'amid lifnei behema umefasfesin. The piki'in, the ones that are tied with 2, you can untie them. That's okay, and you can even spread them. The kipin, and this other tie, the one that's bundled with 3, also you can untie it, you can spread it around, because these are animal food, and you're just making it easier for the animal to eat it. But not the zirin, those are the cedar branches. You can't, because cedar branches are meant for burning, and now by taking them and spreading them out, you are turning them from kindling into animal food. And so you're actually creating food. And that's too much to do on Shabbat. אמר רב חיסדא, מה טעמה דרב הונא? כסבא למצרך באוכלה תרחינן. He says to do some torach, to exert yourself, to is okay. L'shvuye uchla la mishaninan, but to turn it into food is not good. You can exert yourself to make it easier to eat, but not to make something unedible into something edible. That's the first opinion of Rav Huna. Rav Yehuda Amar, hen piki'ain, hen zirin. He agrees in this first thing that piki'ain. No, he disagrees. Piki'ain, he says the same as zirin, right? The piki'ain was the first item here. Piki'ain, that's allowed, and zirin was the last item that's not allowed. And he says those two things are the same. Hen zirizin. Piki'ain today, zirizin telata. Difference is that one is tied with 2 and one is tied with 3. Kipin de arzeh, it's the middle one, the kipin, that's the cedar branches. Matirin pikia amir ben lifnei behema, aval paspose lo. So the first item, you're allowed to untie it, but you can't spread it out. Now, kipin, the piki'in, which is only tied with 2, you can also spread it out. In other words, both of these things, if it's tied with 3, you can spread it out more. If it's tied with 2, it needs it ties with 2, then you can cut it but not spread it out. But the cedar trees, you can only untie. He says, because see, if it's so bundled, it's not edible. So you can take something that's not edible and make it edible, but what you cannot do is exert yourself to make it easier to eat. That's just exertion for no reason, right? Let the animal figure it out and make it and eat it. But you cannot. But you can. If it's not edible, you can turn it into food. All right. Now we're gonna have 2 questions. 2 on each side. 2 against Rav Huna and 2 against Rav Yehuda. Tenan. De'en merasin et hashachat v'et harubin lifnei behema. You cannot. The Mishnah itself, the second item in the Mishnah says, one may not crush hay or carobs in front of for the animal. Whether it's a small or big animal. My love harubin dumya de shahat. Now these harubin, what kind of harubin are they? Must be like they're soft, just like hay is usually soft. Ma shahat rakich, harubin rakich, so they're both soft. Alma lo tarchinan be'uchla betiyubte de Rav Huna. And Mishnah says you're not allowed to crush up either of these items. Now they would be edible. Right, and you're just by crushing it up, you're making it easier to eat, and yet the Mishnah says it's prohibited. So this seems to reject Rav Huna, right? Who says if you're making it just easier to eat, then it should be allowed. So why can't I crush up the carobs and the hay? Amalach Rav Huna la shacha dumya de harubin. It brings 2 things. You compared it this way, I'll compare it the other way. Maybe the hay is more similar to carobs, which are usually hard. Dried out carobs. It's talking about hard, dried out hay that is difficult to eat. And so I'm crushing it up. It's impossible to eat. And so I'm crushing it up to make it edible. And it could be talking about young donkeys, and they cannot eat it well otherwise. And so that's why that could be talking about that case. Okay, Tashema. Now another proof. The Rabbi Yehuda, this is Rabbi Yehuda, the Tana, not Rav Yehuda, the Amora, says Matir beharubin ladaka'in lagasa la. And so he says you can crush up the carobs for a small animal. So that means yes for a small animal, but not for a bigger animal. If you say that you are not allowed to exert yourself to make food easier to eat, shavuye me shavinan. but you can make it edible. Hainu dekamar Rabbi Yehuda charubin ledakana meshavuye uchlahu. So Rabbi Yehuda says, no, this is making it food. Eli amatana kamar sabar shavuye uchla la meshavin. And Barav Takma says you can't make it food. But you can make it more edible, which is Rav Huna's opinion. If you're allowed to make it easier to eat for a small animal, all the more so, you should make it easier to eat for a big animal. Because, because a big animal clearly it would be food, and why not make it easier to eat for that? Okay. Rav Huna can answer, oh, do you think daka means a small animal? My daka gasa. Daka means gasa. Small animal means big animal. That's very strange because that's not the meaning of the word. But we could reread it. My karele daka, the daika beuchla. Don't read it daka, but daika. It's very particular in what it eats. All right. Well, that's not really a good reading either. Before we said whether it's daka or whether it's gasa. So clearly daka is the opposite of gasa. So miklad Rabbi Yehuda daka mamash kamar. So daka can't be daika. Has to mean a small animal. Kashya. And this is in fact a refutation. And Rav Huna's opinion is therefore difficult and is refuted. All right, so even though we refuted that, we're still going to turn to the other side to Rabbi Yehuda and bring two questions upon him. Tashema mehatechin et adiluin lifnei behema. Chopping pumpkins before an animal, lifnei behema, et hanevela lifnei kilabim. And you can take a carcass, a piece of meat, and cut it for the dog into pieces so that the dog will be able to eat it. Now, what kind of item is it talking about? My love dilu in dumya de nevela. All right, these pumpkins similar to the flesh. Ma nevela de kichaf dilu in de kiche. Right? Is it that just like the meat is soft, so too the pumpkin is soft. Alma tarchinan beuchla. So you see that they're soft. They could be eaten whole. Right? So I'm just exerting myself to make it easier to eat in this case. And according to Rav Yehuda, that's not allowed. Only if it's not food and making it into food, then it's allowed. But in this case, it can be eaten. So this source seems to reject Rav Yehuda. No, take the two examples in the Mishnah and flip them and compare them the other way. Maybe it's talking about the pumpkins that are often hard. It's talking about meat that turned hard. And that it's not edible in the state that it's in when it's a big piece. For example, elephant meat, very tough. And even an animal could not eat it unless it was cut up. So he's taking something that was unedible and making it food. And that's why it's permitted, according to Rav Yehuda. Or it's regular meat, but he's feeding it to little puppies. And little puppies, it's very hard for them to eat a big piece of meat. And so, again, he's turning it from not food into food. Okay, so Rav Yehuda was able to answer that question. And finally, last question. Tashema, detaneh Rab Hanan min Nahardea, mefarchinan teben v'aspasta uma'arabin. You can crumble straw and alfalfa and mix them together, and then it eats this mixture. So you're kind of creating, right? So you're taking this and alma tarchinan beuchla. So you're exerting yourself to make the food better, right? Because I mean, you're just making it better, but it could eat each one by itself. So you see that it's allowed to make food better, even though you're not creating food. Now it's talking about rotten straw, and it could not be in by itself. And the alfalfa maybe talking about young donkeys, can only in small pieces, and that's why I need to crumble and crush it, right? Not mix it together, I said before, but rather crush each of them, right? So we thought that they're edible by themselves, and crushing it just makes it easier to eat. And that's a question to Rav Yehuda. And he could answer, no, it's talking about rotten straw or a young donkey, and they were not edible, and you had to crush them. And so he can defend his position that one is allowed to do something to the food to make it edible, but you can't exert yourself just to make it easier to eat. All right, So that's the end of that discussion. We had 2 proofs on each side. I think it's a very interesting discussion because we don't want people to do more work than necessary on Shabbat, but you can feed your animals. And so, do you go by what the effect is that you're changing a status from not food into food, and therefore it's a bigger deal if you're changing it. On the other hand, if it's not edible, then it can't eat it. So it's more necessary in order to help the animal. All right, and so the last Mishnah for today is about force feeding animals. And obscene et hagamal, you can't force feed a camel. Velo dorsin, and you can't force feed it. Well, we'll see what these different terms mean, right? And aval mal'itin. Mal'itin is just putting food in its mouth. It's kind of feeding it, not overfeeding it, not force feeding it. And dorsin is like to push. You're pushing the food down. Okay. Then ma'amirin et ha'agalim. You can't put food in the mouths of calves in this way. Ma'amirin, we'll see, et ha'agalim. Aval mal'itin, right? But you can do it in a softer way, right? Just, we'll see. Mahal-ketin, latin negalin, latin maim lamursan, avalo goblin. Right, so you can feed the chickens in this way and put food and put water into their bran, but not knead it. You can't knead it into like a doughy mixture. Right, well, kneading is a problem. You can't give water to bees or to doves in the dovecote. But you can put water for the geese and chickens and these other kinds of doves. We'll see the basic principle regarding these things of feeding the water is that if the animal can find water or food on its own, then you can't feed it, right? It's just like the ducks, they get their own food, they figure it out. So then you're not allowed to feed them. But if the animal relies on you in order to get fed, then you may feed it. So if it's your own pet, your own dog, whatever, then that is allowed. So that's the main difference in the cases in the second part of the Mishnah. Okay, so my end of sin, what does this mean that you can't force feed? Amar Rav Yudain osin la evus betoch me'eha. The word evus means a trough, and by force feeding it, you're kind of making a trough where you is kind of the serving bowl for the animal. By putting so much food in it, you're kind of making its whole digestive system into one long trough, just forcing all that food down, and that is not permitted on Shabbat. It's not necessarily nice to do on during the rest of the week either. Maybe a Sarab al-Achaim, but that's a different matter. Here we're just talking about Shabbat. Wait, does anybody really do this? I even saw one time in Arab, he gave his camel a cord of food, right? A big, it's a big measurement, and it was so fat, and then he was able to put another cord on its back that it had to carry. So yeah, you can force feed an animal quite a lot of food. Okay, it says and ma'amirin. So back to Mishnah, says and ma'amirin aval mal'itin. So you can't do ma'amirin, but you're allowed to do mal'itin. So what do these words mean? Ezohi hamra'a, ezohi hal'ata. Amar Rav Yehuda hamra'a l'makom she'ena yechola lahazir. Hamra'a is pushing the food down its throat so far that it couldn't possibly regurgitate it back up. Halata is putting it down its throat just a little bit, that if it needed to cough it up, it would still be able to, right, wherever that spot is. And Rav Chisda says, no, both of them are way down. Amra means you're taking some kind of utensil, a stick, and pushing the food all the way down, and halata is pushing it down with your hand just as far as your hand could reach. So Rav Chisda thinks you can do more. You can do more force feeding than Rav Yehuda thinks. Okay, so Mativ Rav Yosef has a question from the Tosefta. Mehalketin la tarnegolin, ben sarich lomar shemalkitin. Okay, these are different words, but they have similar meaning. We just use different words for different species. So this is malkitin and mehalketin. Actually, the same root. Just one is in kal and one's in hifil. So the kal malkitin you can feed, a little bit. But mehalketin is force feed a lot. So that's the Tosefta. And malkitin leoneh shobach leoneh aliyah. And you can't even feed at all or feed in this way these doves of the dovecote or the attic. And and all the more so, you can't force feed them. My mehalkitin or my malkitin. So what does this mean in the Tosefta, these two terms? Malkitin if malkitin means that we feed it into its mouth with our hands, and malkitin, which the one that's allowed, is we just put the food in front of it. But the case of the dovecote, the doves in the dovecote, it says you can't even do the lighter one. So that means you can't even put food in front of it, right? So why wouldn't you be able to put food in front of them? Rather, it must be malkitin is force feeding it more and putting it all the way down its throat to a place that it could not cough it up. Malkitin means a place where it can cough it up. Okay, so then since these two terms are referring to force feeding it all the way down the throat or not all the way down the throat, the other term, hamra'ah, which was said regarding, not with birds, but regarding animals, that must be something different than this kind of feeding by hand. That's talking about with a kli, and this would reject the first opinion here of Rav Yehuda. In other words, because we already accounted for the definitions of feeding above and below the spot where it can cough up, and yet we have another term of hamra'ah, so that must mean something in addition to that. And so we reject Rav Yehuda in favor of Rav Chisda, who thinks that hamra'ah means using a utensil to push it down. Okay, but he's not. He has an answer. No, I'm going to go back and say what you said originally. Malkitin would be just putting food in front of it. Mehalkitin is when you force it down with your hand. And your question that you asked, how come the doves in the dovecote, I'm not allowed to even put the food in front of it? Yes, in fact, it's not allowed. These doves, they take care of themselves. They go out and they forage and they find food, and they don't rely on you. Therefore, you're not allowed to even put food in front of them. Whereas the other items, the chickens, the other animals, they do rely on you for food. They don't have the ability to go out and find it on their own. And so those, you can put the food in front of them. But I thought it says you're allowed to feed your dog, but not your pig, if you raise pigs, which is a different problem. But the pigs, they eat anything, they go and they find food, so you don't have to feed them. The dog relies on you for his food, the pig does not. Good. אמר רב השמת נתינה מדייקה, אין נותנים מים לפני דבורים לפני יונים שבשבח, אבל נותנים לפני אווזים, לפני תרנגולים, לפני יוני הרדסיות. Rav Asher is now backing up this interpretation of Rav Yehuda, because the rest of Mishnah says you cannot give water to bees and or the doves in a dovecote because they can find their own food. But you do give water to chickens and these other kinds of doves, Why? Because the first, the second category rely on you, even for their water, and the first ones, they do not rely on you. Okay, that was just talking about water. So why'd you say only, why'd you talk about only water? Then it should mean that also food you can't put in front of them because they can take care of themselves. No, water is easily found. And so those kinds of birds, they can go and find water. But food is not so easily found, so they do rely on you for food. So you can't put water before them, but you can put food in front of them. And now we have a little drasha based on this difference between dogs and pigs. Sadiq knows the cause of the poor. There's a famous pasuk because Rabbi Akiva says it when after he goes and studies for 24 years, and then he comes back and his wife is coming to greet him, and all of his bodyguards are like pushing her away. And his wife is coming back, and she's dressed with all rags because she was so impoverished. And her neighbors say, why don't you get some nice clothing? And she says, Yodea Sadiq din dalim, right? Sadiq, meaning Rabbi Akiva, he knows how the poor fare, and he'll be understanding. I don't have to dress up for him. Okay, anyway, this pasuk is quoted here, different context. Yodea kadosh baruch hu bekeleb shemizunotav mu'atim lefichach shohach ilato b'ma'av shelosha yamim. God knows that it's a dog his food is hard to come by. It's not a great hunter. It doesn't whatever, maybe domesticated dogs, whatever kinds of dogs. And so therefore, when it does get a meal, it needs to hold on to it. And that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu made its digestive system very slow, so that it holds on to that meal for 3 days. And so it can sustain itself until it finds the next meal, which might not be for another 3 days. ככלב שלושה ימים מעת לעת, בעופות ובדגים כדי שתיפול לאור ותישרף. As we say regarding a different halacha of tum'ah, if you find food inside a dog that's not digested, how long will it be considered impure? In other words, still considered food. In the case of a dog, it's 3 24-hour periods. In other words, not digested for 3 days later. But for fowl and for fish, just the time that it would take to burn it. In other words, very fast, because they digest their food very quickly. So we can learn from here that it's a good idea to throw a piece of meat in front of a dog, right? Because even HaKadosh Baruch Hu cares for sustenance. You see a stray dog, it's hungry, right? That's a nice thing to do, to throw it a bone, you say. How much? As much as big as its ear. And then give it a whack. Why give it a whack? So it doesn't follow you, right? Because now you started feeding it. Now it's going to think you're its master. Okay, so all you want to do is help it out a little, but you're not adopting it as a pet. And that's only when it's out in the field that you could do that. But if it's in the city, don't give it anything, because no matter what you do, it's going to follow you home and you'll never get rid of this dog. It says there's nothing poorer than a dog and nobody richer than a pig, because a dog it's hard to get food, but a pig eats anything. So since it's not picky, it always has food around, it always has food available. And so there's nobody richer than a pig. All right, I think that's a good lesson. If you're not picky in your own needs, then you'll be able to enjoy a lot more things and feel rich.
Be the pig? Was the lesson be the pig?
Take a lesson from the pig, right? Exactly. Okay. Like a lot of people like traveling, but if you're a high maintenance traveler, and you need to go first class and stay in a nice hotel, then you're not going to be able. It's going to be very expensive. You might not be able to afford traveling very much. But if you're willing to camp out and and travel any way you can, then you can travel to a lot more places and feel richer. All right. Tanya Kivate de Rav Yehuda. We have a baraita that backs him up. That says, that force feeding is less. Ezu hamra'a ve'ezu halta'a hamra'a malbisa ufokes et piha uma'achila kalshinin umayim bebat achat. Al'ata ma'achila me'omad umashkah me'omad ונותנים כשינין בפני עצמן ומים בפני עצמן. So we have a baraita that says, what do these terms mean? Hamra'a, which is the one that's more, is that means you take the animal and make it kneel or lie on the ground, and you force its mouth open and you feed it these vetch, kind of beans, legumes, and water at the same time, so that it can't get it out. So that's that's a lot. Although it doesn't say with a utensil. Al-ta'a is when it's just standing, and you give it food in the normal way, and you give it the food separately and the water separately. And so you see that according to this baraita, it's the lighter form of feeding and force feeding that we are concerned with. And baraita backs up his opinion. And we'll see the next baraita is connected to the next page. We'll see that tomorrow night. Baruch Adonai Olam. Amen. Amen.